What happens when you suddenly stop reaching out? Most people assume that silence means nothing. They believe that if they stop sending messages, stop checking in, or stop initiating conversations, the other person will simply continue with life as usual. But human psychology rarely works that way. The mind becomes most focused on what it can no longer predict. When a pattern has existed for a long time, people become comfortable with it. They begin to expect it without even realizing it. A message in the morning, a reaction to a story, a quick check-in during the day. Small actions repeated over time create a sense of certainty, and certainty is powerful. The moment that certainty disappears, attention immediately shifts toward the missing piece. At first, he may not consciously recognize it. He may simply notice that something feels different. The routine he became accustomed to is no longer there. The familiar source of attention has gone silent. Then the questions begin. Is she busy? Did something happen? Why hasn't she reached out? The more he cannot answer these questions, the more his mind starts searching for explanations. This is because the human mind dislikes uncertainty. It prefers closure. It prefers knowing where it stands. When certainty is replaced with silence, curiosity naturally takes its place. What makes this even more powerful is that silence provides no clues. Words can be analyzed, actions can be interpreted, but silence leaves room for imagination, and imagination is often stronger than reality. People rarely obsess over what they fully understand. They become occupied by what remains unresolved. For the first time, he is no longer focused on what you are giving him. He is focused on what is missing. That shift changes everything, because the silence he never expected is often the moment he begins paying the most attention. One of the most powerful changes in human behavior occurs when certainty disappears. As long as someone believes they have guaranteed access to your attention, they rarely think deeply about its value. What is constantly available often becomes part of the background. Not because they are ungrateful, but because familiarity creates comfort, and comfort reduces awareness. When a man becomes accustomed to hearing from you, he begins to expect your presence without consciously recognizing it. Your messages, your reactions, and your attention become predictable parts of his routine. But the moment that pattern changes, something important happens. His certainty is replaced by curiosity. Suddenly, the attention he once assumed would always be there is no longer guaranteed. For the first time, he notices the difference between having access to your attention and earning it. This creates a psychological shift. Instead of asking, "When will she message me?" he begins asking, "Why hasn't she?" Instead of focusing entirely on himself, he starts paying attention to you. He begins observing your actions, checking for signs, and looking for explanations that can restore his sense of certainty. The human mind naturally seeks answers to unanswered questions. It wants to close open loops and resolve uncertainty. When those answers are unavailable, curiosity grows stronger. What makes this process so powerful is that curiosity generates attention. The more uncertain people become, the more mental energy they invest in understanding the situation. They replay conversations, they reconsider past interactions, they search for clues they may have previously ignored, and in many cases, they begin to see your value more clearly than before. Not because you demanded attention, not because you chased validation, but because your absence interrupted a certainty he had quietly taken for granted. The moment your attention is no longer guaranteed is often the moment he becomes most aware of how much he enjoyed having it. Curiosity replaces certainty, and curiosity is the beginning of renewed interest. One of the oldest principles of human nature is this: people often value something more when it becomes less accessible. This does not happen because the object, person, or opportunity has changed. Its actual value may remain exactly the same. What changes is perception. When something is always available, the mind becomes familiar with it. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also reduce appreciation. The presence of that person becomes expected rather than noticed. This is why absence can have such a powerful psychological effect. The moment access becomes limited, the mind begins to reassess what it once overlooked. What felt ordinary suddenly feels important. What seemed guaranteed now appears uncertain. Human beings are naturally drawn toward what feels scarce. Throughout history, scarcity has increased value. Rare resources are treasured more than abundant ones. Exclusive opportunities attract more attention than those available to everyone. The same principle often appears in human relationships. When a man knows he can receive your attention whenever he wants, he may unconsciously take that access for granted. But when that access becomes less predictable, his perception begins to change. He starts noticing your absence. He starts remembering your presence. And most importantly, he starts recognizing the emotional value that was hidden inside the routine. The mind is constantly comparing what it has with what it might lose. The possibility of loss often creates stronger emotions than the certainty of possession. This is why absence frequently triggers reflection. He begins replaying conversations. He remembers moments he previously ignored. He thinks about the energy, attention, and connection that once felt normal. What makes absence so powerful is that it activates imagination. Without constant interaction, the mind fills the empty space with thoughts, questions, and possibilities. And imagination often magnifies value. The lesson is not about playing games or creating distance for manipulation. It is about understanding a simple truth of human psychology. People do not always recognize the value of something while it is constantly available. Sometimes it is only through absence that they truly see what was there all along. One of the most overlooked aspects of human psychology is the desire for influence. Whether people admit it or not, they like knowing they have an effect on others. They enjoy feeling that their words matter, that their presence is noticed, and that their actions create a response. In relationships, this often happens without conscious awareness. When a man becomes used to your attention, he also becomes used to the influence he has over your emotions and behavior. He knows that a message will likely receive a reply. He knows that his presence will capture your attention. Over time, this predictability creates a sense of control. Not necessarily control in a negative sense, rather a sense of certainty. He knows where he stands, he knows what to expect, and he knows that your attention remains available. But the moment you stop reaching out, that certainty begins to disappear. For the first time, he can no longer predict your actions. He doesn't know what you're thinking, he doesn't know what has changed. And most importantly, he doesn't know whether he still has the same influence over you that he once had. This is where attention often increases. The human mind pays the most attention to situations it cannot control. When outcomes become uncertain, people naturally focus more energy on understanding them. Instead of assuming your attention is there, he begins wondering if it still is. Instead of feeling secure about his position in your life, he begins questioning it. And questions create focus. He may start checking his phone more often. He may become more aware of your absence. He may even find himself thinking about you during moments when he previously would not have. Why? Because uncertainty has replaced predictability. The possibility that he is losing influence over you forces him to reevaluate the connection. Suddenly, your silence becomes information. Your distance becomes noticeable, and your independence becomes impossible to ignore. The irony is that many people receive the most attention not when they constantly seek it, but when they demonstrate that their emotional state is no longer dependent on someone else's actions. Because true power begins the moment your peace no longer requires another person's validation. And when that happens, people often notice far more than they ever did before. There is a subtle behavior that often appears when communication suddenly stops. Very few men will openly admit it. In fact, many may not even realize they are doing it. But once your silence continues, he begins paying attention to one question above all others. Will she reach out first? At first, he may tell himself that he is simply giving you space. He may assume that you are busy or distracted. But as more time passes, curiosity turns into observation. Without saying a word, he starts watching. Not necessarily because he has lost interest, but because he wants information. He wants to know whether the connection still matters to you. He wants to know whether your attention remains focused on him. And most importantly, he wants to know if you will eventually break the silence. This creates what can be described as an unspoken psychological test. Neither person announces it. Neither person discusses it. Yet both sides often become aware of it. The reason is simple. When someone reaches out first, they reveal something about their level of emotional investment. They show that the connection is important enough for them to take action. For a man who has become accustomed to your attention, this can become a source of reassurance. If you contact him first, it confirms that his position in your life remains secure. But when that message never arrives, certainty begins to weaken. The silence starts creating questions. Has her interest changed? Has she moved on emotionally? Is she focused on other priorities? The longer these questions remain unanswered, the more attention they demand. Human beings naturally seek confirmation. They want proof that they still matter, that their influence remains intact, and that the connection has not disappeared. When that confirmation is unavailable, the mind keeps searching for it. This is why silence often becomes more powerful than words. Words provide answers. Silence creates questions. And unanswered questions tend to occupy the mind far longer than explanations ever could. The hidden test most men never admit is not always about pride or ego. It is about certainty. He is waiting to see whether you will return to the familiar pattern. And when you don't, he is forced to confront a possibility he never expected, that your attention may no longer be something he can automatically count on. One of the most fascinating aspects of human psychology is that people often do not see things clearly while they are constantly in front of them. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also create blindness. When someone becomes a regular part of your life, your mind gradually stops focusing on their value and starts focusing on their availability. Their presence feels normal, expected, predictable. This is why perception can change so dramatically when that presence suddenly disappears. The woman herself has not changed. Her personality is the same. Her qualities are the same. Her value is the same. Yet somehow, she begins to appear more interesting than before. Why? Because absence forces attention. When communication becomes less frequent, the mind no longer has constant access to information. The easy flow of interaction is interrupted. The certainty that once existed begins to fade. And whenever certainty fades, imagination takes over. Instead of seeing only the person who was always available, he begins remembering specific moments, the conversations he enjoyed, the energy she brought into his life, the feeling he experienced when she was around. Memories that once seemed ordinary suddenly gain importance. This happens because distance creates perspective. People rarely appreciate the full impact of someone's presence until they experience that person's absence. For the first time, he is no longer focused on what she is giving him today. He is focused on what he misses. And what we miss often appears more valuable than what we possess. The mind naturally magnifies things that are no longer easily accessible. It fills in gaps with curiosity. It revisits memories. It searches for meaning. As a result, the same woman he once viewed as predictable now appears mysterious. The same woman who always seemed available now appears independent. The same woman who once blended into his routine now stands apart from it. And that change in perception can be powerful, not because she tried to impress him, not because she demanded attention, but because her silence revealed something he had overlooked. Her value was always there. The difference is that now he is finally paying attention. Sometimes people do not recognize what makes someone special when they are constantly present. It is only when the noise disappears and the silence begins that they truly see what was in front of them all along. There often comes a moment when silence stops being something he observes and becomes something he feels. At first, he may not react. He may assume that the distance is temporary. He may expect that the familiar pattern will eventually return. After all, people tend to believe tomorrow will look much like yesterday. But as time passes, something begins to change. The silence that once seemed insignificant becomes impossible to ignore. The messages that never arrive become noticeable. The attention he once received without effort is no longer there. And slowly, the absence starts creating a psychological vacuum. Human beings are naturally driven to resolve uncertainty. When something feels unfinished, the mind keeps returning to it. It searches for answers. It seeks closure. It wants to restore a sense of certainty. This is often the point where he begins reaching out again. Not necessarily because he suddenly changed overnight, not necessarily because he fully understands what he is feeling, but because the distance has created a level of awareness that constant attention never could. When someone is always available, there is little urgency. There is little mystery. There is little reason to question their value because their presence feels guaranteed. But once that guarantee disappears, perception changes. He starts wondering what you are doing. He starts wondering whether you are thinking about him. He starts wondering whether someone else is now receiving the attention he once took for granted. These questions create emotional movement, and emotional movement often leads to action. This is why pursuit frequently begins where certainty ends. The irony is that many people try to gain attention by giving more and more of themselves. More messages, more explanations, more effort. Yet excessive availability often removes the very tension that creates curiosity. Distance, on the other hand, allows the mind to notice what it has lost. It creates room for reflection. It creates room for appreciation. And it creates room for desire to grow. Eventually, the uncertainty becomes strong enough that he feels compelled to close the gap himself. So he sends the message. He starts the conversation. He makes the effort. Not because he was forced to, but because the distance made him realize something that constant access never revealed. Sometimes, the strongest attraction is not created by chasing someone's attention. It is created by showing that your life continues with purpose, confidence, and peace, even when they are not there. And when that happens, the pursuit often begins on its own. At the heart of everything we have discussed lies a lesson far more important than attraction, attention, or relationships. It is the lesson of emotional self-control. Most people spend their lives chasing validation. They seek reassurance through messages. They seek confidence through attention. They seek worth through the reactions of others. And without realizing it, they hand over control of their emotional state to people who were never meant to hold it. The problem with seeking validation is that it creates dependence. The moment your happiness depends on someone else's response, your peace is no longer your own. A delayed message can affect your mood. A lack of attention can affect your confidence. A moment of distance can create anxiety. And when another person gains that much influence over your emotions, you place yourself in a position of weakness. True strength begins when you stop measuring your value through the actions of others. When you no longer need constant reassurance to feel secure. When your confidence remains steady whether someone reaches out or not. When your sense of self-worth comes from within rather than from external approval. This is what emotional self-control looks like. It is not coldness. It is not indifference. And it is not pretending not to care. It is caring without becoming controlled. It is valuing connection without becoming dependent on it. It is maintaining your peace regardless of what another person chooses to do. Ironically, this is often the moment when people begin respecting you more. Because confidence is attractive, self-respect is noticeable, and emotional stability is rare. When a man realizes that your happiness does not depend on his attention, he begins to see you differently. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer seeking approval. You are no longer trying to prove your worth. You already know your worth. and that changes the entire dynamic. The strongest position in any relationship is not the ability to control another person. It is the ability to control yourself. Because the person who masters their emotions cannot be manipulated by silence, distracted by uncertainty, or weakened by the need for validation. And that is the final lesson. The greatest power is not making someone chase you. The greatest power is reaching a point where your peace, confidence, and self-respect remain intact, even when no one is chasing at all.